All right, let's talk about the financial world's version of a disaster drill. It's called a stress test, and it's a really powerful tool designed to stop the kind of economic meltdowns that can impact, well, pretty much all of us. But how does it really work, and what's its most dangerous blind spot? Let's dive in. You know, it's one thing to plan for a problem you can see coming, but it is a whole other ballgame to prepare for a catastrophe that has literally never happened before. And this is the exact puzzle the banks and huge financial companies have to try and solve every single day.
So here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with the dangerous blind spot and how things used to be done. Then we'll get into the solution that's designed to prepare for the absolute worst. We'll check out the different tools in the toolkit, see how they're actually used, and finally get to the heart of why this is all so much more than just crunching numbers.
Okay, so before we can really appreciate the solution, we have to get a handle on the problem. And that problem, it lives inside a very common but pretty limited forecasting tool. It's called value at risk, or you'll usually just hear it called VAR. Now, think of VAR like your daily weather forecast. It is fantastic at telling you there's a 99% chance of sun. It's great at predicting normal, day-to-day stuff. But you know what it's not designed for? It's not designed to predict that 1% chance of a catastrophic, once-in-a-generation hurricane. So on one side, VAR is great. It's great for measuring those likely frequent bumps in the road when things are, well, normal. But here's the kicker. Its blind spot is huge. It completely misses those catastrophic, super rare events, what the math folks call the tail end of risk. In other words, VAR is blind to the exact kind of shocks that can bring an entire company or even an entire economy right to its knees. And that is where our main character enters the story. Stress and Scenario Testing, or SST. This is the tool that was specifically designed to peer into that dangerous blind spot and to model the financial version of that hurricane. Yeah, unlike VAR, which is all about looking at what's happened in the past, SST is all about looking forward and asking that simple, powerful question, what if? What if the absolute worst happens? What if a global recession, a market crash, and a housing crisis all hit at the same time? It's about simulating these really severe but still plausible disasters to see if a company could actually survive it. And believe me, this isn't just some theoretical homework assignment. The goals here are incredibly practical. The whole point is to really, truly assess all the risks, make sure there's enough cash on hand, what they call capital, to soak up massive losses, and maybe most important of all, to help the company's leaders really understand what they're up against so they can make smart decisions and build real, actionable plans for a crisis. Okay, so SST isn't just one single thing. It's really more like a toolkit, right? With different instruments for different jobs. Let's take a quick look at how they all work together to build a complete picture of risk. So you can see the differences pretty clearly here. First, you've got sensitivity testing. That's like asking what happens if interest rates just nudge up by 1%. It's small scale. Then there's scenario testing. That's broader. It imagines a whole alternative future with lots of different things changing. But stress testing? That's the big one. It's a deep bottom-up look at a single extreme event, like a 70% crash in a key market, just to see how much damage it would cause. So, how does this stuff actually play out in the real world? Well, after the 2008 financial crisis, regulators basically said, okay, this can't just be an internal exercise anymore. This has to be the law. And in the United States, that took the form of something called the Dodd-Frank Act. What it does is it requires the Federal Reserve, the country's central bank, to put the nation's biggest banks through these intense stress tests every single year to make sure they're strong enough to survive another huge crisis. And these tests are no joke. A severely adverse scenario isn't just a little dip in the market. We're talking about simulating a massive global recession, GDP falling off a cliff, unemployment soaring, stock and real estate prices just plummeting, and insane volatility. They basically throw the kitchen sink, a coordinated global economic nightmare at these banks' balance sheets to see if they'll crack. Now, all of this sounds incredibly solid, right? We've got the math, we've got the models, the regulations are in place, but this right here is the most important part of the whole story. These tests are only as good as the human beings who have to interpret them and then act on them.
Which brings us to the billion-dollar question. If we have these incredibly powerful tools designed to prevent disasters, why do financial firms still get into massive trouble? Why do these crises still happen?
Well, it's because success isn't just about running the test. It's about everything that happens next. First, you have to be testing for the right kinds of disasters, the ones that are specific to your business. Second, and this is so important, the senior leaders and the board of directors have to actually understand what the results are telling them. And third, they have to come up with action plans that are realistic and doable, not just, wishful thinking on a PowerPoint slide.
This quote from an analysis of the 2008 crisis just says it all. The problem wasn't always a lack of information. The problem was that in too many cases, the board either didn't really grasp how severe the risks were, or they just failed to take the tough actions needed to fix things. The warning lights were flashing, but nobody was paying attention.
So, here's the bottom line. The models, the regulations, they're just tools. The ultimate defense against a financial meltdown isn't the stress test itself. It's building a strong culture of managing risk throughout the entire organization, from the very top all the way down. A culture where people actually listen to bad news and make tough decisions before the disaster hits.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty challenging thought. Stress tests are an amazing tool for getting ready for the kinds of crises we can imagine, based on history and logic. But the biggest question of all remains, how in the world do you prepare for the crisis you can't even imagine, the one that is truly completely out of the blue? Now that is the ultimate test.